My grandfather on my dad's side was a world-class bird carver. I'm a little bit jealous of older generations at times because they had all these really cool crafts and things that they would do. Now, like, what do you like? As a young generation, we're like, I'm good at Twitter. It's like what is that? What are you going to be able to pass down to your kids with that, right? My grandfather would start off with this big chunk of basswood. He would cut it out and had this skill saw. He would cut this somewhat of a shape that kind of looked somewhat like, okay, that could be a bird, maybe if you're really good at it. And anytime you'd walk into my grandfather's house, you would smell sawdust and burnt wood. And for some of you, you're like, that's an awful smell. It's like, it smells like home to me. Like, if I think about it long enough, I can smell it. It's just like right there. It's like, oh, I can just sense my grandfather right there just carving this bird. And so he'd start off with this chunk of wood and start carving. And he'd have this picture of a bird that he wanted to carve. And he wanted to paint. And he would kind of mark it out and say, this is what I'm going to do this time. Maybe it was a cardinal or a hummingbird or something like that. And he would start off, start whittling away at this big chunk of wood. And over the next few weeks and the next few months, you would see these stages of this bird that he was working on. From the outside, as somebody that didn't know anything, that still doesn't know anything about bird carving, you would look at it and think, like, how in the world is this going to be a bird? Because, like, in certain stages, it looked deformed. It would look kind of like off, or like maybe the beak's a little bit too long or too short. And, you know, you just kind of like, you know how we get, like, we can kind of look at the outside and judge things and like, you're not doing this right. Let me show you how to do it. I don't know anything about it. And he would start working on this, and as he would go, it kind of had these stages and all these different things, but I would question every step, wondering how is it going to turn out and work that way. But the woodworker, my grandfather, he would sit there and he would take this wood burning tool and he would burn in the feathers on the bird. He would wood burn the beak and all the different details, and he would pull out his like painting stuff. He looked like Bob Ross in there just painting this bird, and it would turn out beautiful. He'd sell them for thousands of dollars. Just this beautiful pieces of artwork that as a young kid I remember thinking like, wow, that is amazing to be able to do. But as I was questioning it, I would think, man, this isn't going to turn it. This isn't going to be a good one. But the woodworker, my grandfather, was working with an end in mind. And this is a great illustration of how God is with our lives, that we may not understand every step of the way, right? You may question things along your journey and your path that the Lord is giving you and directing you on that you may not understand fully. Has anybody ever had a season like that? You're just like, why am I in this season right now? I feel like I'm doing the right things. I'm obeying the Lord. I'm serving. I'm giving. I'm reading the scripture. I feel close to the Lord, but I don't understand why I'm in this season. You may not understand it now, but how many know when we look back on different seasons throughout our lives, it makes a lot more sense when we look back on it and how it shaped us over that time. In the end, the great master, the craftsman, if we allow God to, he will shape our lives into a masterpiece. And so today we're going to dive into the book of Ruth. Very, very popular book of the Bible, squeezed in between Judges and 1 Samuel, 4-chapter book. It is short, but it is powerful. If you know it, you know that it's powerful. It's this beautiful story of redemption for these two women in particular that we're going to talk about, Ruth and Naomi. So here's just a few interesting facts about this book. As we are in this series, God's Big Story, and we're working our way through the story of the Israelites, and you got Judges that we just came off this awful season, awful time of the history of Israel, and then Ruth actually happens during the time of the Judges. And so think all this stuff's going on. Ruth is happening in the middle of Judges before we get to, Samuel, the prophet, and the kings, and start working towards Saul and David. That we'll start covering the next few weeks. The book of Ruth is considered to be one of the most intriguing literary writings in the entire Bible because it's packed with allegories and foreshadowings of the New Testament, the gospel of the Savior. And I want you to pay special attention to that as we read through this book today. We're not going to read every verse of the of this book, of every chapter, but we are going to cover every chapter today. And so it kind of has this foreshadowing of the gospel. It's one of only 2 books in the Bible that are titled after women. But it is the only book of the Bible that's titled after a woman that's not an Israelite, Esther being the other one. If you know the scriptures, you know the Bible. And so it takes time and a place of Judges, squeezed in here between Judges and 1 Samuel. So here's my encouragement to us this morning. The best way to look at the book of Ruth is really in 4 different acts or scenes. If if you're in theater, you might catch that a little bit more if you've been in theater. 4 different acts or scenes. Each chapter kind of has a main idea or a thought or an event that takes place that kind of shapes that chapter, and then it goes on to the next chapter. So 4 chapters, 4 scenes is what we're going to look at. And so today may be a little different in the sense that it won't be as much preaching, but we're going to be very story heavy this morning, focusing, because I want the scriptures to speak for themselves this morning as we read this story together. And here's the main idea, if you're writing notes before we jump in, so you can kind of know the direction that we are going, is that God works in our day-to-day life while simultaneously working on the redemption of the world. God's working on the day-to-day of your life, of our life, of Ruth and Naomi's life, as simultaneously he's working on the redemption and the saving of our universe, the world. And so Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, we're going to start there. And it says this: "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." And so how far have the Israelites fallen in this story so far? You think about it, the people of God, the Israelites, rescued out of slavery, provided for in the desert, into the promised land, and now what do we see? Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. It says there was a famine in the land of Israel. It was a land that was this is the promised land. This is a land that's supposed to be flowing with milk and honey. It's supposed to be a land with good fruit, and now we see that they're in a famine. So how does a nation that has so much power and have God on their side, how does that nation end up where we read in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, that they are now in a famine? If you remember back to Judges, they started to rebel. They did not kill or get rid of all the other gods, the Canaanite gods, and they kind of let them, and they start intermarrying with these people, and they start serving the other gods of Canaan, and they start turning their back on God, rebellion and sin. And what does sin get them is the same that it gets with us, is it leaves us broken and in despair. My grandfather used to say it this way, is that sin will take you farther than you wanted to go, and keep you longer than you wanted to stay, and cost you more than you wanted to pay. Isn't that true of our lives? It's true of the Israelites as well. So this husband and wife, Naomi and her 2 sons, they take off to Moab in search of a plentiful land. So we're going to look at verses 2 through 5 of chapter 1. The name of the man was Elimelech. Kind of sounds like you're clearing your throat a little bit. Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of her 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were the Ephrathites, not Epaphrites, Ephrathites, and from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the other one was Ruth. I think Ruth got the better name out of the 2. Orpah. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died. So that woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. You talk about a rough 10 years of your life. This lady named Naomi, she's married to Elimelech. They go into this land looking for this land of plenty, and she thinks, if we could just go here, survive for a little bit, and then we can go back to our land. And all of a sudden, they end up in this country of Moab, and her husband dies and her 2 sons die. I want to show you a map because we kind of lose the picture of what was happening in this moment. It might be hard to see, but there's a little red line. So if you look in Judah, Bethlehem is just north of Judah. That's where Naomi and Elimelech and their 2 sons were from. And they traveled to the country of Moab, or the nation of Moab, and they go down. And so it looks like a really, really long ways, but really it's about 50 to 60 miles from Bethlehem to Moab. But the reality is, and you know this, like this is not just flat land. This is not just they're not jumping in their Tesla and going over to Moab. They're climbing over hills and valleys and deserts and walking in these really difficult situations and circumstances. Most scholars say that it would take them anywhere from 6 to 7 days to travel from Bethlehem to Moab. So they travel there already in a state of poor, and now they get to Moab, and the husband dies, Elimelech, and then the 2 sons pass away in 10 years. So chapter 1 of the book of Ruth is really about the emptiness of Naomi. The emptiness of Naomi. We see this desolation of Naomi, that she kind of goes with her heart full and her life full, or quiver full, so to speak, and then she goes to Moab, and then she's left without anything but her daughters-in-law. Not that they weren't important, But there's something different about your blood family. This Israelite woman is now searching for food, and now with no family, now with no job, she's a widow and her 2 daughters-in-law. So let's look at verse 6. And then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. For she had heard that the fields of Moab and that the Lord had visited his people, the Israelites, in Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and had given them food. And so she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on to the return to the king to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to your mother's house, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." Now, Naomi, an Israelite, would have understood that there was going to be great challenges for her daughters-in-law to come back to Israel with her, to come back to Judah, to come back to Bethlehem with her. Because being a sojourner, especially in that time, it was going to be this difficult life for her. Naomi has now lived in Moab for 10 years, and she knows the challenges, and she's thinking, I've got these 2 daughters-in-law, go be with your family in your home country. Go be in your home country. Go be with your people, because you don't have to come back with me. She would have known it, so she tries to send them away. Now, the custom of this time would be that the widow would actually return to her father's house or her mother's house. And this widow would live in the women's quarters of the home of their father, and they would kind of restart their life from there. And so Naomi says, I want you to go back. Now, 2 things that stick out here in this short passage is that Naomi uses the word, it's translated as Lord, but it's the word Yahweh. It's the personal name of God, Yahweh. It's Israel's God, the personal God. And so after 10 years of living in Moab, I find it interesting that living in a foreign country, losing her husband, losing her sons, and when she's talking to these daughters-in-law, she mentions Yahweh, this personal relationship with the Lord, that she hasn't wavered in her relationship with the Lord. And I think there's a great challenge in that for us when we hear that story and we hear what's going on with Naomi here. The challenge is that we are what Paul calls sojourners, or we are foreigners. We are citizens of another world. It says it in Ephesians and a couple other places that we are citizens not of this world. We are citizens of another world. We are sojourners living in this foreign land. And at times we know and we understand that it gets tough. Life gets tough and challenges come our way. Death happens or unforeseen circumstances happen and come our way. And we think, wow, this is wild. And what happens a lot of times is people end up questioning, but look at Naomi's faith. Is our faith as strong as Naomi's? Is God that personal to us when we face challenges and when we face difficulties? Do we sense a closeness to Yahweh in the middle of the valley that we find ourselves in at times? The second thing to note is where Naomi uses the word kindly, that the Lord may deal kindly with you. This is a challenging word to translate from the Hebrew, but it's the word hesed. It sometimes translates as loyalty, or sometimes translates as love, and really it could be translated as loving kindness. That the Lord's loving kindness may be well with you. You could almost rephrase that sentence there. Many times it was communicated in a covenant sense, that God's covenant-keeping, loving kindness, that kind of love. And what Naomi is trying to say to these 2 women, in the sense, he's saying, may the Lord deal kind with you, is that the Lord is faithful. I want you to think about this for a moment. Think about where Naomi finds herself. Without a husband, without her children, now with daughters-in-law, in a foreign country with no food and no job and no way to provide for herself. And she looks at these 2 daughters-in-law and she says, the Lord is faithful. That's some great faith, isn't it? That's thought-provoking, challenging faith when we read that. That's an incredible faith that we can sometimes only dream about, that we could have that kind of faith in our life, that we could look at our circumstances and say, no matter what I see around me, the Lord is faithful. Look at the end of verse 14 in chapter 1. It says, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave. or do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Orpah, she probably gets too bad of a rap in this story so many times. Like, when I've read this story, I'm like, Orpah's just like, all right, see you later. Hard times have come. I'm out. See, I'm going back to my dad's house. That's kind of how we see it at times, right? But the reality is that there's actually a submissive obedience to what Orpah's doing too. Orpah, we sometimes look at her and say, like, she's like not the good daughter. Like, there's got to be like one good one and bad one. She has to be the bad one. Some of y'all are like, I'm not pointing out who that is, but they're in the family, okay? But the reality is, like, we look at that and we say, like, she did something wrong. But here's the truth. She was being obedient to her mother-in-law. Go return to your family. And Orpah says, okay, I will go and I will return to my family. And so we don't want to make a villain out of Orpah and say that she's done this horrible thing. She's actually being obedient to her mother-in-law and to the Lord. But we do pay special attention to Ruth. It's important to point out Ruth's faithfulness here. It says that, but Ruth clung to her. Ruth and Orpah, I want you to go. I want you to be with your family. Go back and kind of restart your life. And Ruth's like, nope, I'm breaking all of the societal norms, and I'm going to put my feet in the ground, and I'm going to hold on to your legs because I'm not going anywhere without you. So both of them are actually doing the right thing. So we got to make sure we don't make Orpah this awful person. Ruth clung to her. I'm not going back. And she says this line that's so beautiful into that passage, for where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Many commentators say, as I've been studying this passage, that this is a sign of Ruth's conversion. This is an outward sign of Ruth's conversion, because you remember, Ruth is not an Israelite. She wasn't born into the land of Israel. She was not a Jew. She was kind of this I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. She was just off child from this group of Moabites. Like, she wasn't this godly person. And now we find her like clinging to Naomi, saying, your people are going to be my people, and your God is going to be my God. It's possible that she was converted earlier than this moment, but this is proof of her conversion. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Can you see God working in the middle of this story so far? Think about it. In the middle of Naomi's pain and bitterness and hurt, what is the Lord doing in the middle of that? He's taken this lady named Naomi to this foreign country so that this foreign can now become a child of God. We don't like to think about our pain and those that God can use our pain, that God can use our challenges, but we get glimpses of it like this, where we can see our pain being purposeful in the grand scheme of God's overall plan. That in the middle of Naomi's suffering, we see people coming, these daughters-in-law coming to obedience to the Lord because she was in a foreign country. God is working in the details of this story. He's also working in the details of your life. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 1. We're going to look at verses 1 through 3. So chapter 1 is really about the emptiness of Naomi just losing kind of everything. In this foreign country for 10 years, lost everything. Chapter 2, verse 1. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. And so she set out and she went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come upon the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And so now Naomi and Ruth are in Israel, in Bethlehem now. We find these women with no husbands, no job, no food. And so they did what the poor did. And this is the beauty. When you read the Old Testament and you really study, we can sometimes see God as this iron-fisted ruler, but we see these glimpses as well, and much more, his grace and his provision for those that are left out and outcasts. It says that she went to glean in the fields. Basically, what this was is the landowners were commanded that as you're reaping the harvest of your wheat and you're gathering this wheat, you can only go through the field one time. Even if one of the workers bundles up a thing of wheat and leaves it in a field by accident, you can't even go back. Whatever is left is for the poor, for the outcast, for the needy. There's another command in the law that says that you're not allowed to harvest up to the borderline or the fence line of your property. So that when a sojourner or traveler, a homeless, a jobless, or a widow would be walking by, they could provide for themselves and they could grab some grapes or they could grab some wheat. So God's plan or way of providing for the poor, for the needy, it's always the generosity of his people. Think about that for a moment. How does God provide for the people that are needy? It's through the generosity of his people. That's why the church gets a lot of flack in our world, but I love the church. When you look at all these organizations all across our country and all across our world, they're doing incredible work, providing services and things that the government, there's cracks in the way that governments are set up. And we see these Christians and Christ followers providing for financially or getting called to go and to do a work that is difficult and challenging. Lindsay and I have some friends that they have a ministry where they minister to people as they're coming out of prison. Because many times when people are coming out of prison, they've lost contact with their family has abandoned them, and then they go to these halfway houses, and I don't know if you know this, but halfway houses aren't necessarily the greatest thing in the world. And so they can provide them resources, and they give them fresh clothes, and they give them shoes, because when they come out of prison, you know what the bottom of their shoes say? The bottom of their shoe says offender. Think about the label. So we see people like this, hey, let me give you a new pair of shoes. Something as simple as that is providing a need, and it's kind of providing for somebody that doesn't have anything. And we may look at that and say, wow, what they did, they deserve to be there. The reality is if God gave all of us what we deserved, where would we be? God's way of providing for the poor is always through his people. Let's look at verse 3. So she set out, and she went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come upon the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. I love this part. It says that she happened to come upon this land. This is not by accident. Y'all hear me? This is not by accident. This is the same reason that some of you are not in this room by accident. Some of you in this room, this message will speak directly to your heart, and you're going to be like, man, I so needed that. That's a Lord sovereignly putting you in this room saying, you need to hear this message. We've all had moments like that, right? You ever been in a service and you felt like that the preacher was preaching just to you, and there was like a spotlight on you, and you're like, oh, I don't like this. But guess what? You needed it, and the Lord put you in that room, didn't he? It says she happened by accident to walk up on this field. It wasn't by accident that Ruth stumbled upon this field. Many people look at God and think, wow, he's got so much going on. He doesn't care what's going on in my life. And it's just so minor, it's just minor things going on in my life. He's got so many other things to worry about. I want you to hear me very clearly this morning. That is a lie from the enemy. God cares about the details in your life, even the little things. Someone needs to hear that this morning, that someone that feels forgotten, someone that feels unimportant, that the Lord sees you. The second thing that's important here is that it's hard for us to comprehend in our world is that Boaz being a relative was a good sign for Ruth and Naomi. It meant that there was someone that could help them, but it also meant that there was a possibility of romance for Ruth. Now, in our day and time, when you hear that somebody is your cousin, even by marriage, that doesn't exactly strike up romance, does it? Maybe in some weird parts of our country, but not around here, right? I would make a joke about some other states, but some of y'all might be from there, so I don't want to offend anybody. But we're probably thinking of the same states. So Ruth happening upon this field owned by the very one that could save them and redeem them. This is a good picture of God's sovereignty and man's free will working in tandem together. It wasn't by accident that Ruth stumbled upon this field. This is the Lord saying, in the middle of your darkest moment, in the middle of your most challenging time, I'm going to provide for you. Think about that for a moment. Man, what a beautiful thought. Chapter 5 says this, then Boaz said to this young woman, who is in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Whose young woman is this? I want you, if you're comfortable to do this, I would encourage you to underline that question in your Bible. I write in my Bible, I highlight it, so it's like normal to me. Some of you are like, oh, you can never do that. Highlight it in your Bible. Whose woman is this? What Ruth more than likely saw herself as is she's a widow and a foreigner, a Moabite. She's poor. She's got no job. She's in this field, hot, sweaty, dirty, gleaning and picking up the leftovers of this wheat that has just been harvested. Probably not the picture of confidence, right? But what do we know is true about her situation? The Moabites were offspring from Lot and his daughters, a cursed people, a dirty and unclean people. She's a widow, which in their culture was seen as used goods. And she's poor, which in many in that culture saw as a sign of God's judgment. Whose woman is this? This question, really what Boaz is doing, he's given us a picture of God's perfect unconditional love. That doesn't see us as damaged goods. He doesn't see us as judged, as shameful, as hurt, as broken, but he sees us as his. Boaz, I'm sure had heard the rumors about what was going on, and as word travels fast, and understood that there's a few widows that were coming back from this foreign land, and there has to be this foreign woman now that is with Naomi, and whose woman is this? If you go down just a little bit in the passage in chapter 2, you'll see that Boaz stops her and tells her, and he says, I don't want you to go to another field. I want you to come to my field every day. I want you to get whatever you want, whatever you need, it's yours. It's just kind of like an Old Testament pickup line. So single people, I'm going to help you out just for a little bit, so I want you to write these down. I've got a few for you this morning. You ready? All right. I was reading the book of Numbers, and I realized that I didn't have yours. Don't do that one, all right, please, for the sake of your pride. Here's another one. Now I know why Solomon had 700 wives, because he never met you. That one's better, all right? Last one, is your name Faith? Because you're the substance of all the things I've hoped for. Please, in the name of Jesus, don't do those. So Boaz, sorry, Josh is laughing and I can't stop laughing. Boaz tells her, don't go to another field. Like, I want you to come to my field, glean off my field. And it doesn't really say if Ruth's pretty or not pretty or what, whatever. Sometimes the Bible say things like that, like she wasn't very pleasant on the eyes. And you're like, wow, what a thing to write, But it doesn't say that, but evidently he was attracted to her, and he gives her this hey, come to my field. Let's look at verse 10. And she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Can you see Ruth's, her pride just being broken? Like, I'm a nobody. Why would you even notice who I am or that I'm here, that I'm a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. And how you left your father and your mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. Verse 12, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wing you have come to take refuge. What a passage. Notice what gets pointed out by Boaz. It's Ruth's faithfulness to her mother-in-law. In a world that screams, climb the ladder and burn bridges to get there, do whatever you have to do to be successful, we can sometimes forget that one of the fruits of the Spirit is faithfulness. I'm not saying don't provide for your family. I'm not saying don't take opportunities. But what I'm saying is that the Lord, a fruit of the Spirit, if we're following the Lord, faithfulness is going to be in that mix. So Boaz sends Ruth home with more wheat, and Ruth takes it to Naomi, and Naomi is just blown away. Let's look at verse 20, what Naomi says. And she says, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. So in chapter 1, Naomi, after losing her father, or losing her husband and losing her sons, she renames herself Mara, which translates as bitter. There's this bitter widow who has lost literally everything. And pain, and many of you have felt like this and had moments in life and even seasons where you felt like Naomi, you felt bitter, like life is over. But when Naomi sees the kindness of Boaz, it's almost like she goes from death to life. There's this newness. There's this sweetness that rises up in Naomi like, wow, look at this. Look how the Lord is providing for us. And so she praises Boaz for the gift, but Naomi, she goes immediately back to praising God for providing for her. She says, going back to God's loving kindness, that God hasn't forgotten her. She tells Ruth why. Why is Naomi so excited? She says this word, redeemer. This is an important part of the story and important for the entire narrative of Scripture. Is that in this culture, if you were in hard times and difficult times, what you could do is deed out your property or your home, everything that you have worked for, you could deed it out to someone else. But at any moment, at any time, you could go back and buy your property back. You could deed out your property to somebody. They could pay a price for it, live there, work the land, all the things. You could go away, pay off your debts, and you could come back at some point, anytime you want, and you could buy your property back. You could redeem it. You had the right to do it. But if you didn't have the money, here's the important part, and why Naomi is so excited. These two poor widows, is that a family member or a relative could do it for you. A family redeemer. So they had to be family. They had to have the resources, but they also had to be willing. It wasn't required. But if you read this story of Ruth and Naomi, and you can't see the Lord working in the background and the details of her life, and every step of the way, every moment, the Lord providing exactly what they need at the moment that they need it. What a beautiful picture of God's provision in our lives, isn't it? Chapter 3. Verse 1, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may go well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, whose young women you were, whose with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. So Naomi tells Ruth, I don't want you to dress like a widow. I don't want you to dress like you're in mourning. I want you to get cleaned up, smell good, look good, have right clothes, and I want you to go down. I want you to follow my instructions. Now, I'm not exactly sure how you met your spouse or how you asked your spouse to marry them, but this probably wasn't on the list, was it? I want you to wait till Boaz is sleeping, and I want you to uncover his feet in the middle of the night. That's weird, right? Like you'll get shot for something like that in Texas. I want you to uncover his feet, and I want you to be there. Really what this is two things. It was Ruth asking Boaz to marry him. I want you to be my redeemer. I want you to marry me. And I want you to redeem Naomi. This is a formal invitation, so to speak, of Ruth saying, come, be our redeemer. It sounds all romantic and nice, doesn't it? It's like, wow, that's just a beautiful story. But there's just one problem, because in chapter 3, verse 11, we find out that there is another redeemer that is a closer relative than Boaz. Let's look at verse 11. And now, my daughter, do not fear, for I will do all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. You can almost hear the air being let out of the balloon, right? Boaz finds out there's this other relative closer than Boaz, and this person has first rights to be the redeemer. They have to be really in complete shock, like thinking, we finally found someone for ourselves, and now here comes cousin Johnny out of the woodwork. We don't know where he came from, but he's going to come and redeem us, and we don't know anything about each other. Chapter 3 kind of ends on this tension of like what's going to happen. Chapter 4, let's look at verse 1 of chapter 4. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. And so Boaz realizes there's this other Redeemer that's closer. I want you to come. And he kind of presents everything to him. In verse 4, the end of verse 4, this other Redeemer says, I will redeem it. It's almost like Boaz hears this and he's like, wait a second. Like, and so he's almost like this unnamed relative. Seems like he's more focused on the land that he's acquiring, and it's just used to belong to Naomi. And so Boaz is smart. Look what he does in verse 5. He says, Boaz says, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetrate the name of the deed in his inheritance. And then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. It's almost like Boaz kind of gives this other guy like this fake story of how bad it really is. You probably don't want it. It's not that, like, you know, like it's like every like old man's dream. Like every time you're at Thanksgiving and you eat something first and they're like, how good is it? And what's the joke that they say? Oh, you probably don't want any. It's not very good. Yeah, because what they're really saying is, I want it all for myself. Boaz, I don't know if you ever seen the slideshows of realtors when they go in homes that have strange things. You ever seen those slideshows on the internet? Where they, like, somebody built something really strange in a house, like the toilet's in the middle of the closet, or like there's like weird things, or somebody's like infatuated with clowns, and so they have a whole room that's like nothing but clown figurines everywhere. It's like, who does that, right? It's almost like Boaz is like, okay, you can redeem it, but you're also going to get the mother-in-law too. I have a great mother-in-law, so this is not like, this may be about your mother-in-law, it's not about my mother-in-law. A lot of nervous laughter in the room I can hear. So this man decides, like, I'm going to pass. You redeem it, Boaz. Verse 13. And so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore him a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord. The women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. Boaz and Ruth get married. They go and they do what married people do, and Naomi and Ruth are now redeemed, restarting their life. And I love this line that the Lord, these women that are around Naomi say, the Lord has not forgotten you. The Lord has not left you. Listen, many people will question their faith when they find themselves in challenging circumstances and difficult seasons. And I want to encourage you in this, is that the Lord can handle your doubts. I want you to hear that very clearly, because we've kind of bought into this lie in our culture that if we doubt something, then we just kind of have to run away from it, because if it's not all, like, if we can't have doubts, or if we have doubts, then something must be off or not true. The Lord can handle your doubts. But the reality is, we look at this story of Ruth and Naomi and being rescued and redeemed by this man named Boaz. It's a statement of faith that these friends say around Naomi. The Lord has not left you. In the middle of your challenges, in the middle of your circumstances, in the middle of your frustrations, you need to repeat that line to yourself many times. The Lord has not left me. Verse 16, chapter 4. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the father of David. The story of Ruth is a story about redemption. I imagine Naomi, now redeemed, holding her grandchild, saying over and over and over that the Lord has redeemed my family. Think about that picture. This lady that was this empty, this lady that had nothing in this foreign land, comes back to her homeland with nothing but her and one of her widowed daughters-in-law, and now she's redeemed, not knowing that her grandchild would be the grandfather of the greatest king in Israel that Israel had ever had. But just knowing that she had not been forgotten. And it's here that we start to see this line of the son of David, this genealogy of Jesus, that we start to see fleshed out throughout the scriptures, that we see this widowed woman that had nothing now has this grandchild named Obed, who's going to be the grandfather of David. And so here's an encouragement for us this morning, is that when we study, we look at the genealogy of Jesus, we will see that we serve a God that is able to sympathize with our problems. Story after story in the genealogy of Jesus, we see people that had difficult circumstances, challenges, and even frustrations, sinful people, broken people, all throughout the lineage of Jesus as it is coming down through David. So here's just a few things that I want you to remember from this story this morning. Is that one, is that God's big story is all about redemption. God's big story is all about redemption. This word redemption is used 23 times in the short book of Ruth. Redemption, redemption, redeem me. I will redeem you. 23 times it's mentioned in the book of Ruth, redemption. And this book starts with death. It ends in life. Think about it. Naomi is the book of Ruth begins with Naomi looking for rest, and she finds it only after being redeemed. Naomi was bitter, but now she has become pleasant. She was empty, but now she ends the book full. This is our story as well. As we find ourselves in death, Romans says that the wages of sin are death, but the gift of God is eternal life. When we start that journey of following Jesus, we come from death to life. There's a redemption. There is a newness. There's a new life, that we are a new creation in Christ. Before God, we're spiritually dead. Second thing I want you to remember is that redemption is for everyone. Think about this for a moment. If you notice, this book is not just about powerful, rich people. And there's kind of this popular thread that is going through our country and our world right now about Christianity, because if you ever hear somebody say that Christianity is a powerful white man's religion, I want you to hear me. They are wrong. It is not about a color. It is not about a wealth status. It is not about any of that. This book's main characters are widowed. They're poor. They're jobless. They are unwanted. They are used goods. And what does God do? Only that he could do. He takes a few women like that and he says, you know what? I'm not just going to redeem you. I'm going to let the lineage of the Son of God come from you, you broken people. In Jesus, the outcast is welcomed. The poor are provided for. The foreigner becomes a citizen, and the bitter becomes sweet. And I want to encourage all of us, no matter what side of the spectrum of politics you fall on, we as a people of God, not just collective, but the church as a whole, should be leading the way on loving and caring for the outcast and the unwanted in our culture. What many want the government to do, the church should be rising up and saying, I'm going to fill the gap. I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be called to do something that seems ridiculous and incredible and challenging, because the Lord has called me to do it, because this is how he provides for his people. The third thing is that God cares about your day-to-day life. God could be seen as a skilled craftsman weaving a basket together made of reeds. When it starts, there's all these different strips, or in our cases, lives. He starts weaving this basket together, and we may not understand it. You may look at it and think, how is it going to turn out? How is this going to turn out to be something that looks handcrafted and worthy of carrying something? May have to bend a little bit. You may have to go a way you don't want to go, but in the end, the grand master, the master craftsman, what is he doing? He knows the big picture in mind, doesn't he? But what is God doing in the middle of that? He's using your everyday life to meet the needs of other people, to meet your needs, to shape you and mold you, so in the end, we can look at the grand master and know that his plan availed. The main idea, God works in your day-to-day life while simultaneously working on the redemption of our world. You should bow your heads with me this morning.